All right, hello everyone. We're going to take just a few more minutes here and wait for others to join us. We have tons of attendees today, which is great. Looking forward to this. So we'll give them about 4 or 5 more minutes at most, and then we will hop right in. I'm glad you all can join us. I'm going to enable the chat here while we get started in case anybody wants to chat before we jump in. As soon as we get started on it, typically we disable the chat. So feel free to get to know one another for a little bit, and then we'll get started here in a couple of minutes. Thanks for joining us. All right, everyone. Thanks for joining today. Can everybody in chat let me know if you can hear me okay? All right, looks like it's coming along. Great, thank you, everyone. Really appreciate that. Okay, great. Well, really quickly here, I'll put myself on video and say hello. Thanks for joining us today. Really quickly, a few housekeeping items as we get started. I'll refer to my trusty list here. If you have any questions during the webinar, use the Ask a Question. It's right at the bottom of your screen down there. Just click on that button and you can ask the question. You can also upvote other people's questions. That will help us to know what are more popular questions as we get to the end. We will try to leave some time to answer any questions that come up. And then also know that the recording or replay of this webinar should be available almost immediately as soon as the webinar is over. So if you need to leave early, or if anybody missed this, they'll be able to watch it on the same page that you registered on thegood.com almost immediately. So we'll make sure it gets up there pretty quickly. So again, thanks for joining me today. I'm going to turn off my video now and focus on the screen presentation as we get going here. So you just met me, but I wanted to introduce myself a little further. My name is John MacDonald, CEO here at The Good. We are a conversion rate optimization firm, as you likely know. We help e-commerce companies to increase their online sales and leads. And our services really focus on converting more of a company's existing website traffic into buyers. So we do that through, as I mentioned, conversion optimization, which includes process, meaning that we want to do everything based on data. So we're looking at things like A/B testing and data science, tracking every click and movement that consumers take on your site to improve the usability and the overall conversion rate of your site. Now, we've been doing this for 9 years this month. Actually, our anniversary, 9th anniversary is in a few days here. And along the way, we've helped brands both large and small increase their conversion rates. We've worked with brands like Nike, Xerox, Adobe, and lots more all over the world. And today, we're going to talk a little bit more about what conversion rate optimization is, how we do it, and we're going to get to the most anticipated part, which are the teardowns. So quick deeper dive into the agenda today. After this introduction, we're going to cover some of the basics of optimizing e-commerce sites for conversions. The goal here is to establish a common language between us so that as we get into the teardowns, you guys have a good understanding of what I am referencing. Then we'll look at the key data types you need to be aware of in conversion optimization. Lastly, we're going to cover how that data is utilized. And this is where we're going to get into the fun part, the live website teardowns. And at the end, I'll open it up for your questions, but don't hesitate to ask them along the way, again, by using the Ask a Question feature down towards the bottom. And we'll make sure, again, that I leave some time at the end for us to dive in and answer your questions. All right, let's jump right in. So what is conversion optimization and why do you need it? Well, this is how we define conversion optimization here at The Good. A data-backed system for increasing the percentage of website visitors that convert into customers, or more generally, take any desired action on a web page. Okay, let's break this down pretty quickly here. Data-backed, some emphasis on that, and that's why it's up front. Conversion optimization is not about trying just random tactics until one works. It's really about using the data, again, all those clicks and movements of your site visitors to decide where is best to optimize on your site. And then we get into a system. Any seasoned conversion strategist knows that successful optimization is found in not just one tactic, but in a compounding effect of continued optimization applied in a structured and well-planned out manner. Now, when done correctly, conversion optimization is not going to double your conversion rate overnight. That's an unrealistic expectation. It is kind of like interest in a bank account. It's going to compound and grow over time and pick up steam the more you follow that same structured process. The next part of this definition is increasing the percentage of website visitors that convert into customers. Well, the point I want to make about this is that, well, conversion optimization is technically about improving conversion rates. It's right there in the name. We also believe that it's about maintaining margins and that that's just as important. Or to put it more simply, only focusing on discounting is not a conversion optimization strategy. That's actually called margin drain, and it's something that you'll find quite a bit online, a lot of articles about how to improve conversion rates through discounting. it's really not the first tactic, or really a tactic you should be focusing a lot of effort on. Lastly, take any desired action on a web page. Well, a purchase is not the only conversion point that matters. On the contrary, it's helping your visitor go further down their research funnel or their purchase funnel that can be just as valuable. So you can also focus on other key metrics like email signups or path to purchase, or helping people get what they need on your site. Now, I say this all the time, and it's in a lot of our articles, so maybe you've seen or heard this from us before, but there's really only two reasons that consumers are on your site. The first is that they have a need or a pain, and they think that your product or service can help them solve that pain. And they're there to do research to understand if that's true. So they want to do that research and learn that as quickly and easily as possible. Then secondly, they want to convert. They want to, if you can help them, and the research tells them that you can, they want to buy your product or know where to buy your product as quickly and easily as possible. Okay, let's take a look at why you need conversion optimization. Conversion optimization is important because competitive research really only takes you so far. A common habit that I see every day is that many e-commerce brands, they like to make website design and user experience and functionality decisions on their website based on what their competitors are doing. I would argue that this is a big mistake. You should really, again, be basing things on your particular user's data. Why is that? Well, for starters, what if you're simply seeing a variant of an A/B test that your competitor is running? Every consumer on the internet is being opted into A/B tests on a regular basis. It's happening to you every day, and you have no idea that that's happening. Many brands are testing incremental improvements to their website experience to make their websites more sticky and engaging. And even if you're not opted into one of their tests, how do you really know that the one tactic you want to copy from your competitors is actually working from them? Look, unless they're willing to spill all of their trade secrets and tell you, and I seriously doubt that they're going to, you just simply don't know. And that's why it's important for you to focus less on what your competitors are doing and more on what your site visitors are actually doing. More specifically, you need to pay attention to and understand the actual clicks and movements of your site visitors. You can't base your experience decisions on how you wish your visitors would engage with your site. You really need to focus on and basing those decisions on how they actually are engaging with your site. Now, you're probably thinking, yes, okay, I get it. You've said that 3 times now, John, but how do you figure that out? Well, that's where data comes in. You can pull a ton of insights from the clicks and movements that your consumers are making on your site. So let's dive in a little more detail here. And if you can't read this comic over to the right, it says, when you two have finished arguing your opinions, I actually have data. And I think this is really relevant because conversion optimization is not about opinions. It's not about what we think is going to work. In fact, we're shocked every day where we think a tactic might work for a company because it just worked for another company. It has completely different outcomes. And again, that's why we always want to base our recommendations on data, and we want to base it on the data of our specific customer that we're working with. Okay, let's dive into this data in a little more detail. So what types of data are involved in conversion rate optimization? There are 4 key types, or I like to call them groups because there's a lot more we could cover, and it could be a whole webinar in itself to talk about data that would be in conversion optimization. But let's talk about 4 key groups and types of data that we utilize every day. The first is analytics. This, of course, includes site usage analytics, like what most would consider coming from Google Analytics, one of the most popular, if not the most popular analytics package. But this also includes analytics like top sellers, revenue numbers, seasonality. Are there different times of the year where your product naturally sells better? And there's lots and lots of other types of analytics data, but what we're really looking at here is number-based data of interactions on your site, but also looking at number-based data of your business. Next, we want to look at heat maps. Now, this is more than just heat maps. It's generally rolled up to call heat maps, but we're also looking at things called scroll maps, click maps, and other movement maps, mouse tracking, for instance. We really here are looking for exactly how people are engaging with your site. What are they doing on your site, and where are they engaging in content? How far down are they scrolling on your page? What are they clicking with? What are they finding interesting? Now, what we're looking for here is actual usage. Now, we can infer why people are using things in that way, but we want to find out why they're using it in the way they are. Which brings me to the third one, which is user testing. So we want to look at both the qualitative and the quantitative side of data, and this allows us to pull from both. So we use user testing, and what this allows us to do is observe real individuals using your website, and what they're doing is they're trained to talk out loud about the experience that they're having on your site. So while we're recording their screen and their audio, we're asking them to complete tasks, and we're doing this in a non-leading fashion. What I mean by that is we don't want to tell them exactly what to do. We want to give them an endpoint and say, find your way there. And what that allows us to do is have a good understanding of how people are engaging with the site and why, right? Because they're explaining to us the challenges that they're having. So we're able to get a more complete picture. Now, typically when we do user testing, we do lots and lots of user testing, and it results in hours upon hours of video. What we're looking for in all of these videos is similarities, maybe challenges that people might have, and just general explanations as to why they're running into challenges so that we can help solve those. Lastly, we use A/B and multivariate testing to statistically test which changes to the site produce better results. So here we could do anything from testing navigations to testing content on a page. And we can get pretty in-depth on what we test. And there's a whole science behind how to do that, which we can perhaps cover in even another webinar. So really now the next question is, how do we apply this data? How do we apply this raw data to improve conversions on your site? So let's look at using some of this data. So what we know is that data tells us what is happening on the site, and we use these sources together to help us understand why it's happening. So first of all, we look for patterns that help us to develop insights on visitors' behavior. We also use the data to inform our hypotheses around why particular behaviors are occurring and how we can impact those behaviors to improve where we want the consumer to go and do. And finally, it helps us to design experiments and tests that give us better insight into that consumer behavior and to help us know and use data to know which of the suggested improvements are actually going to improve the conversion rate and the goal that we've set out for this test. So all of this together makes up the optimization process. Really, an optimization process is an iterative process of small incremental changes that are going to add up to a more engaging site tailored to the your consumers' actual behaviors. In the end, you really want a website that fits your target audience like a glove. So what does a website that's tailored like this result in? Well, it results, of course, in an improved consumer experience. And it increases your website's engagement, right? So we're not necessarily looking for time on site, but we are looking for, are they engaging with the right content? Are they getting the information they need? And are they going further down that research or purchase funnel? It also increases your average order value, which is a key metric, right? So we talked a little bit in the definition about how conversion optimization is about improving conversions, but it's also about doing things like increasing the average order value. helping people to understand relevant products, bundling, things of that sort. There's some great content up on our site. If you just use the search box and search for average order value, you find some great ways to help increase that. It also helps lower your cart abandonment rates. Now, this is a big one that we focus on. It doesn't do you any good to get people all the way to the point where they end up in your cart if then they leave it there. We want to understand why they're not purchasing and taking that final step, and how we can influence that, perhaps even before they get to the cart. So ultimately, this all leads to happier customers, right? And that's a great metric. It's hard to track, but it's one that we do want to help influence and focus on. So it leads to a website experience that is less burdensome and more enjoyable for your audience to use. So let's see how you can use just one data point to start optimizing a site quickly. And this is where we're going to get into the teardowns. So I'm excited to jump in here. So we had dozens of sites submit for live teardowns. Looks like we have over 50 people that are joining us today, and that's great because I apologize, we're not going to be able to get to everybody who submitted today. We do have a limited amount of time, but in an effort to get to a few of these today, we're just going to evaluate one page from each of these sites. So a few things that I'd like you to keep in mind as we look at these. First is that with all of these, all we had was access to a URL that was submitted. We don't have access to these sites' analytics, such as Google Analytics, any of that data we talked about. We don't have access to a site source code to add in data tracking, like heat maps, click maps, scroll maps, that type of data. So we're going to rely on one piece of data today, and that's eye tracking. So we're going to look at that and see what that produces and make some hypotheses and suggestions based on that data. Now, this is great actual practice because what I'm trying to get across here is that we can see how valuable even optimizing your site on a single type of data can be. So if you find any value in the teardowns today, understand that this is really just the tip of the iceberg. Right? There's so much more depth we could go into here as we have more data. Also, it's helpful to keep in mind that all the items that I'm pointing out today are suggestions for things we would recommend testing, right? So are these things that brands could take and just implement right away? Sure. But would I recommend doing that? No. I would recommend that we set up A/B tests and get some more in-depth data. But we're able to use that one piece of data today and pull out some pretty good suggestions. So if you guys are ready, let's jump right in. All right, first up is upperdeckstore.com. Now the teenager in me got really excited when this got submitted. I definitely collected baseball and basketball, football cards growing up, so was excited about this one. Let's take a look at it. Now, if you're not familiar with these heat maps for eye tracking, this is what you really need to know. First is that anything that is red or hot, heat map, right? So it starts with red, is where people spent the most time looking. So deep red is where people's eyes spent the most time. Then it flows out in order of how much time people spent looking at a particular area. So it goes from red to green, red to yellow to green to blue, where blue spent the least amount of time. And then gray, or there's no color, indicates where people didn't look at all. So this is going to give us a pretty good understanding. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to start at the top of each page, and we're going to work our way all the way down to the bottom. So we'll take a look at this. This is the home page for upperdeckstore.com, and let's dive right into some of these. So at first glance, at this site, as a visitor, I'm left with way too much information to sort through right up front. Overall, it's a bit too busy, and really the eye tracking shows that because the eyes are all over the place with big gaps in the middle of the page. Typically what you would see is a lot more interaction in the middle of a page. So looking at this, I count at least 6 different call to actions, or CTAs, before we even get past that main feature image. And that's not even counting the individual navigation items. So I highlighted all 6 of these areas here. And you can see, the navigation gets really overpowered by that new arrivals tout. It almost hides the navigation visually. If I hadn't called that out, your eyes would likely pass right through and over it. And you can see here in the eye tracking that it's kind of yellow, green, blue in that range, which indicates to me that it's pretty cool. And their eyes did pass right through it. Most visitors follow an F pattern, right? So they start at the top left of the site and move over to the right and then back down the left-hand side of the page. What we're finding here is that they start at that logo, go down to the navigation, which is not uncommon, but then their eyes are drawn right back up to that new arrivals. And then they think there's a navigation above it, secondary nav. So then they start wondering, what is that? And I want to pay attention to it. And then they end up back over to an orange box that's search and then a bold phone number, so they look up there. All of this has not been helpful necessarily in pushing them further down that research or purchase funnel just yet. They're not necessarily oriented with the site to know what new arrivals they're even looking for. And then as we get into the navigation, there's just a ton of different items there. Let's focus in on that navigation for a second here with these highlighted areas. So you can see here that users end up looking all the way through that navigation, which often tells us that they can't find what they're looking for, right? And in the sense that if somebody is spending this much time looking at all these navigation items, they're really trying to look for something and they're not finding it. So for instance, we start by listing the sports that ostensibly there's trading cards available for, but then it goes just into trading cards. So now I'm a little confused because, well, I'm thinking to myself, wait, doesn't Upper Deck sell trading cards in all the sports just listed? But now I'm a bit confused because I don't know the difference. Should I click on a sport or a trading card? Well, whatever, I'm going to continue in the nav and I'm going to see what else they have. And maybe there's something else that will help me kind of figure that out. But then the context switches from a filter of a sport to a category, that type of product. And so that's where it gets pretty confusing. And then I get to the very end and I get even more confused because it says suite 1 of 1. Well, this is obviously a marketing message or brand. And without that insider knowledge, it's very difficult to understand what this means. So as a first time or an infrequent visitor to the site, maybe that relates to some product or some promotion. But as a visitor, I have no idea what that is. So then it becomes very difficult to understand. And already, before I've even gotten past the navigation, I have a seed of confusion and doubt, which does not help my experience as I get through the rest of the site. As we move down the page, we can see that users are spending a lot of time looking at these large blocks of copy. You can see it's bright red. But in reading it, there's really no value being provided. It could stop at the first sentence. And I would argue that that would be much more helpful for the user. In fact, maybe I'm a good test subject for this because I did collect trading cards. I don't at the moment, but I have a whole bunch of them at home from my childhood years. I am an athlete, so I do love athletics, and I do understand some of the target audience here. But in reading this, I almost got upset as I was reading through it because I was like, what am I trying to be told here? In the box that I highlighted, it might be hard to read on screen. I'll read it to you just so you have an idea. It says, check out our exclusive collection of Ben Simmons autographed memorabilia. The sky is the limit for Ben Simmons, who is expected to impress this season. The expectations are grand. The results may be even better. Let the journey begin. Well, none of that really plays back to the autographed memorabilia. And if I was actually wanting to click on that, I would just be like, wow, okay, let the journey begin. I guess I'll click on it and go forward, but I just wasted my time reading all of that. As we scroll down the page, we jump right into the athletes. Now, these make great what we call social proof here at The Good. And that the target visitors to this site likely know who all of these athletes are, or the vast majority of them. Now, social proof is great. It is anything that helps the visitor orient around the fact that that others are approving of this brand or contributing to the brand or what they think about this brand. Now, the nice thing here is it does say exclusive Upper Deck athletes. That makes it seem like, and it does say that they don't have cards with anybody else, which is great. Now, what you can see in several of these cases is that people are spending a lot of time looking at the names below the photos, where it's bright red and yellow in a lot of these cases. So what I would suggest to your testing is adding more clearer call to actions, even designed as buttons perhaps, with a clear action you want the user to take. So instead of perhaps it's saying just Michael Jordan memorabilia, something like shop Michael Jordan memorabilia, and make it a clear button that is clearly what you want people to click on and take an action for. And again here where I've highlighted, we have some more good social proof. You have the NBA and the NHL logos, but they're obscured with the logo of Upper Deck first, which really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. People know they're on the Upper Deck site. They've seen the logo already. And what this is doing is taking a little bit away from that social proof of these bigger brands. Now, perhaps the TGR logo is something the audience, the target audience would know about, but many likely won't. So that logo on the far right, I'm not exactly, again, the target market, but as I mentioned, I collected cards as a kid and consider myself a fan of sports. I've never seen that before. So I don't really know what that TGR is. I would recommend perhaps just sticking with the NBA and NHL logos there to help people understand that that you have their blessing and that you're part of their world. One other thing worth pointing out here is this back to top floating button. You can see it over on the right in the blue box. This has become a really common UI element, but it really just gets ignored, as you can see here. I would really suggest removing it to further declutter the site a little bit. Look, here's the thing. If users really want to scroll to the top, they're just going to do it. And they really don't need a button to click on it. Often, what we see with these buttons is that people spend a lot of time looking at them and they're trying to figure out what it is. In fact, they click on it because maybe they don't know, and then they're all of a sudden taken up to the top of the site. It's really disruptive. They don't know what happened, and they have to scroll back down. You can imagine it just even in my explaining it, I'm frustrated as a user. So I think getting rid of those is typically a safe bet and something that should definitely be tested here. As we scroll down to the footer a little more, we can see that information is the first item. Now, that's not very, very sexy, if you will, for a user. They're like, oh, information, okay, maybe I'll pass on. But you can see that people spent some time looking at this by the red area right below it. I would likely test out a more clear description for this section. What exactly are you trying to communicate here? Do you need that header even? Maybe, maybe not. But it could be, accessories, or it's a whole mix of random items. So it's something to be thinking about there is how can we make that more clear so people have a good expectation and a better wayfinding so they can find what they're looking for. Lastly, one other thing I wanted to point out here before we get into this highlight is that there's no link to the products down in your footer. So you do have something under information around display cases, collections of sports memorabilia, etc. But if somebody is really interested in a particular sport or any of that information, they have to scroll back up to the top. So now you've taken them there. If they get to your footer, they're obviously interested in your site. Now they're interested in your content. They've done their research on this page. They've gotten all the way down to the bottom. They're still there. They're likely ready to take that next step down the purchase funnel. The problem is there's no information here to really help them do that. You really want to put all the product information here. If possible, have a shortened main navigation here as well. Okay, let's get back on track with this one where I've highlighted the credit card logos. I like to call this out because I see this all over e-com sites these days. Credit card logos are not really a necessity. They're just not necessary anymore. They're a holdover from the start of e-commerce. Now, it's funny, like I said, I see these every day. And what I usually ask when they're on the site is why did you put these here? And not one person, no one has been able to give me a really clear answer other than, well, everyone else has them. So this is a very clear example of why you don't really necessarily need to follow your competition or what everyone else is doing. It's commonly accepted that if you sell something online, that you'll take all major credit cards or forms of payment. So it's really also out of context here, right? It's really only helpful information when you're in the checkout flow, not necessarily when users are looking at your footer. They're not in the cart. They don't really care at this point. They're still doing their research. So if you have credit card logos in your footer, you can remove them very, very easily and safely. You can test if you want. That'd be something I would suggest testing, of course, like everything else we're discussing today. However, it's pretty clear that you really don't need them in there. Okay, still with me here? Let's move on to the next one. Yates Jewelers. Okay, so a quick look at this heat map before we dive in. Without me calling anything out right away, take a second and let's look at what we see here. So what are you noticing based off the heat map? Well, my first thought is that the navigation is getting largely overlooked. And you can see here that nobody really even looks at the navigation. And while we're talking about this navigation, let's look at a few things here. First of all, first item is get engaged. Now, that doesn't really tell the visitor what to expect if they click on that item, right? Surely they're not going to actually be able to get engaged by just clicking on that button and the nav item, right? So, that's a little bit in jest, but the reality here is that if you're offering engagement rings here, which I clicked on it to find out, and it's what it is, just state that so that there's no confusion. The goal of your navigation should be to help the visitor move themselves down their purchase or research funnel as quickly and easily as possible. And to do that, you really need to ensure that there's zero confusion. You can also see that in that top left corner, everybody started by looking first and spending a lot of time in that top left corner. Now, it's a little hard to read perhaps on the screen, so I'll read it for you. It says, before you pick the date, you've got to see Yates. Well, and then right below that, it goes to free shipping plus 30-day returns. Well, here's the challenge. There's very little value in a company slogan like that. Now, I understand, it's somewhat catchy. Perhaps it's in other marketing materials, and you want to have that related back on the site. But the challenge is that people aren't finding that that's a whole lot of value, so then they don't really continue to the right and get into your navigation and viewing the rest of the information that could be helpful for them. So what happens is they look away and then they come right back. You can see in the middle of the screen where it's really heavy red on the diamonds. And those images are pretty not distracting, but they attract attention, I would say. So they look right down at those, and let's move down the page a little bit and look at that main marketing area. So the first thing that I've noticed here is that you can see a couple of concerns based on the eye tracking. First, the call to actions of shop now are largely bypassed in favor of the headlines and the large imagery. You can see that neither of those two shop now buttons have red area over them, and in fact it bleeds into yellow and green and blue. Those images of the diamonds are beautiful, right? Obviously very nice rings. I'm sure my wife would be very happy to have one of those, but they're also taking away from those buttons. I would really test making the call to action button stand out a bit more. Now, button colors is really not a great technique. You can find 100,000 articles probably online about button colors. and conversion optimization. That's really a beginner tactic. But I would want to ensure here that these buttons are not overshadowed by the images and that they're easily seen. Right now, they're being hidden. Second thing to call out here is that the chat tout at the bottom right is getting a lot of attention. You can see it's bright red. You can see that the color of it is black, or a darker color, right? And so it's popping off the page. It's so much more so compared to Shop Now and almost anything else on this page. So what's happening is it's attracting a lot of attention over in that area. So you can see why it's having something that's on the page that's a little darker in color that you want people to pay attention to, it actually works. As we continue to scroll down, we can see that all of a sudden, the design of the call to action buttons changes. So we went from a box look to just having text. So we've taken this challenge of having the CTAs be kind of hidden, and we've made it even more challenging, meaning that if the box look blended in so much that the visitors didn't notice it, just having text is making that even more of a challenge. So you can see here in the heat map that users rarely spent time looking at the call to action text. And it just, again, it just gets hidden compared to the headlines and the wonderful imagery. It's also worth calling out that sale tout on the right-hand side, the sale tag that I've highlighted. You can see that this sticks out most of everything on this page, and it's getting a lot more looks than almost everything else. And again, it's you can see the chat tout gets a lot of looks down on the bottom right-hand corner as well. So again, having something that stands out like that on the page, is, unless that's the one thing you want people to take action on, it really is, it can be more of a distraction than helpful. And again, another good reason why the CTAs that you want people to click on should be more noticeable. Lastly, it's worth noticing here and mentioning that we've gone from selling engagement rings to offering to buy gold. So the change in context here is likely pretty confusing for a visitor. As you can see, people are spending a lot of time looking at this image in this area. Now, the image there's a lot going on in it, right? It's a pile of gold items that really kind of have to sit there and try to figure out for a quick second what that is. But likely, and I think user testing would confirm this, or I'd want user testing to confirm it, of course, visitors are wondering why the change in context exists here. And what's happening is you're making users be forced to think about it, right? So you went from looking at engagement rings to, oh wait, do I have gold? I want to sell them. And wait, they buy gold? I didn't think that that was even something these guys did. So this content is likely more helpful in a couple of other places. I would look at the footer and putting it in there, and or calling it out as its own item further down the page so that it's not mixed in context with selling items. With Yates selling items. Or if it truly is part of a business model and you really want to have people use this, I would put it in the main navigation. So visitors know what you offer right away and can find it very quickly and easily. Now, this is always an interesting one that I call out. We've done a lot of testing on this, and when you have photos of people on your site, you should always have them looking in towards the page or the content you want the visitor to look at. So here you can see they're looking left off of the page, away from the content you want them, the viewers to read. So it's natural for humans to look at faces and then follow the eyes of that person in the direction that they're looking. So you can see here the eye tracking starts fading down and to the left away from the faces. And then the user goes back up almost under their faces and heads, back up to the right to get back over to that text. So you're asking them to take extra cognitive function here to get over to what you want them to read. Flipping that image, just mirroring it, would do wonders, most likely, for getting people to focus on the content and not the picture. Looking at that content, the wall of text, and I like to call these walls of text because that's truly what it can be. It can feel like a wall to a visitor scrolling down your page. And it's a big barrier. It's great that people are reading it, but it's a big challenge because it doesn't provide a lot of value as part of helping them to go further down that research or purchase funnel. Now, I would suggest testing this copy and breaking it into bite-sized chunks for easy scanning, right? And then you're not forcing people to read and scan through a whole paragraph of text. You're calling out what the main points are. Now, there's some sales benefits in here about why Yates Jewelers is better than competition. That's great. Perhaps even just calling those out in short little touts would be much helpful. Now, I understand that perhaps this is in here for search engine optimization purposes. See that all the time. What I would really suggest here again at that point is pulling out 3 touts and lining those up and then having a sentence below each if you really need that content. Scrolling down a little bit, you have some great social proof. 253 5-star reviews is amazing. This Yelp reviews are great. My only thought here is there should be some consistency in the visual styling of the reviews. One other thing is that I don't think consumers are really going to know who or what Bird Eye is. So it says powered by Bird Eye. You're essentially advertising for that review platform instead of bringing relevancy to the reviews or trustworthiness to the reviews. So how do consumers know that these reviews are trustworthy? Well, you can see here pretty clearly, consumers know who Yelp is and what Yelp is for the most part. It's a big brand name. Most consumers have heard of it. And you can see that they spend a lot more time reading and looking at that review over the other 2. So, I would even maybe suggest just having the Yelp review here. That could be helpful too, and then making sure that the other reviews are mixed into the site. As we continue scrolling, we're suddenly thrown back into a product research and purchase mode. So the content seems a bit disorienting and perhaps out of order. I'd like to see some testing done on reordering the content to keep people scrolling down the page and getting here. But the largest concern here is that we've gone from a boxed call to action button to a text call to action to no call to action. We've taken away all of the visual cues for the visitor, and we want them to click on these items. Lastly, as we get down to the footer, we can see that there is a lack of product-oriented CTAs in the footer. If someone wants to go further down that purchase funnel, they're left to scroll all the way back up to the top. So again, this is what we talked about a little bit ago, in the sense that consumers need some way to continue that research or purchase funnel process to go further down at this point. Okay, that was great. Hopefully you found that helpful. We have about 15 minutes left, so I'm going to cover one more, and then we'll wrap this up, and we'll go from there. So hopefully you're still with me, and let's take a look at one more. NTB.com. Probably heard of these guys as well. They have a lot of retail outlets throughout the U.S. So now the context on this site is going to be a bit different because of that, right? So they're trying to serve both retail research visitors and e-commerce visitors. As I mentioned, NTB has lots and lots of retail locations. So what are we noticing as we look at this eye tracking heat map? I'll take a second here so you can digest it as well. All right. So in line with that retail context, the first thing that users are presented with is to find a store. It's the first thing up front there. They're offered to book an appointment, to schedule now, and book appointment again. So they're all pushing visitors to take action with retail locations. And you can see that, though, that's not even the highest engaged area that people are looking at. They kind of pass right through Find a Store and go to My Garage. You can see that's one of the hottest areas on this on the screen. So correctly, and to be very next, goes into serving online researchers by pushing them further down that research and purchase funnel by presenting filtering options. Now, they offer 4 different ways to filter here. which is okay, and typically, good in this sense, actually. They're saying you can add what vehicle you're driving to see what compatible tires, wheels, etc. they have for your car. You can just search by, if you know exactly what tire you need, what model you want, any of that information. Or you can go by tires by vehicle again and go in even deeper there, or look at tires by size and search and filter right away. So they're getting you right into that research and purchase funnel very, very quickly. So 2 thumbs up for that. Further down, then they're offering all the different ways they can help you: tires, oil changes, batteries. And so that's always helpful as well, to have some context that, oh yeah, they sell more than just tires. So as we get further down the page, and we scroll down a little bit though, this is where there starts to get some challenges. We can see there's a huge wall. Again, I'm using that word wall because it is a barrier of promotions. If the visitor hasn't filtered anything yet and they've scrolled down here, how can they tell this wall of tires apart from one another? Obviously I have a car, I drive, so I use tires, and I've had to get replacement tires before, but I still have no idea what the difference between all these tires are, except for the brand name. And what makes Cooper or Michelin or Continental or Nito or any of these brands better one over the other? I don't really know, other than maybe I recognize their TV commercials online at on TV at some point or something, which really had nothing to do with NTV. It really had more to do with the brand that was advertising. So this is going to become very confusing for the visitor, because the first thing they see is this big brands bonus month and then oil change. So now we're changing from tires to oil, and then all of a sudden we're back to a whole bunch of different tires. And then we get into brake pads in the middle, bottom down there, which hasn't even been mentioned on the site until now. So, and then we're also offering a credit card on here. So there's a whole bunch of mixed contexts and a lot for the visitor to sort through. And you can see that people are spending time trying to understand each of these, and they're looking at each of them very clearly. But then they're kind of, not spending a lot of time looking at the images because they've determined early on that the images aren't going to be helpful. So then as we scroll down, you can see about 1/3 of the page is actually being taken up by TV commercials and videos. Now, I'd argue that if someone is doing research for purchase, either for purchase in retail or for e-commerce, are they really looking to watch these? Are they really looking for this information? My initial hypotheses would be no, and that this content would better be served on its own page of the site. And that maybe it should also list out the offers that would be contained in each video. For instance, you can see in the inner box that I highlighted under description there, the description might be hard to read, so I'll read it out. It says, description, video featuring products available on ntb.com. Now, that's really not helpful in a sense, right? Yes, I'm watching that video, that TV commercial, and I know that I can buy Michelin tires on the site. But I think what would be better served here is providing a clear call to action to go to that product. So actually link to the products being featured in the video. That's a huge missed opportunity. Here, we're calling out that there's live chat on this page. However, you have to scroll this far down before you even get to that. Now, I would argue that the live chat would have been helpful further up on the screen, maybe even when I was looking at the wall of tires with all those offers. The reason being, at that point, I would have a good understanding of, or I would have some questions that I would want helped to have a good understanding of where I'm at in that research or purchase process, or what the next steps could be. So only offering chat this far down the page becomes a bit of a challenge. I would highly recommend testing moving that up the page. Now, let's take a second and compare, as we scroll down a little further, this footer to the ones we just looked at in the other 2 sites. In contrast, this footer does a great job, 2 thumbs up, for helping visitors move themselves further down that purchase or research funnel. There's a clear separation between additional company info and product/research info. So if you're looking at this, you can see they clearly list all the tire brands they sell, some of the services that they have. Then you can get more information about just general things like what oil and fluids ins and outs, prep tips for getting auto services, tire how-tos, true information versus in the right context, which is what we saw on the Upper Deck site where it said information and had a whole bunch of just random links under it that truly all weren't informational. Additionally, they go right into wheels, and then they promote their credit card here. But if you're a credit card consumer, you want a way to pay your bill and understand and maybe even apply. So having that information here and not touted everywhere on the site is great. Then you can see there's a clear separation between additional company info and the product and research info, right? So if you scroll, if you look down to the yellow bar, that's where the additional company info goes, and there's a great clear separation there of context. So 2 thumbs up for this footer. Really well done to the NTB folks, and wanted to make sure that you had a great example of what a footer should look like. Okay, so that's all the time we have for Teardowns today. We've got about 5 minutes left before we hit the top of the hour. Appreciate you all sticking with me this long. One key takeaway I want to make before we get into questions is that this is, again, just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to conversion rate optimization. We really only had time today to take a brief look at some of the challenges that we put on the pages that we reviewed, and only was able to take a look at one page at each of these sites. And you can see how we ended up spending, man, almost 10 minutes per page that we looked at, breaking it down. So CRO itself, or conversion optimization, can go way, way deeper. And we'd want to collect all the types of data that we discussed, as well as running testing on all the items and areas that we suggested looking at today and all the suggestions we made today. So if I could leave you with any point, it's that this is really just one bit sample of what true conversion optimization would do. Hopefully you found that fun and you found some value in that. Takeaway ideas for your own sites as well. So that's all that we have for today. Thank you so much for attending. Before I answer questions, I wanted to take one last bit of time and recommend some next steps. First of all, I'd like to recommend signing up for our weekly Insight emails. If you haven't already received them, we are writing great new content weekly, focused on improving e-commerce conversions. Look, I promise you this is not a sales pitch information. This is really helpful information delivered to your inbox weekly. And it's something that, that we put a lot of effort and pride into. Secondly, if after today's webinar, you'd like to explore conversion optimization more seriously for your company and your site, feel free to get in touch and we can explore if there's a good mutual fit. You can schedule time with us at thegood.com/contact. The URLs here up on the screen. And lastly, as a quick reminder, this recording will be available as a replay within a few minutes after it ends. We'll get it up on the site here shortly. And then if you have any questions after today, you can email me at John, that's Jon, at thegood.com. So that's John without an H, and I'll put it here in the chat box as well, just so everybody has that. Feel free to shoot me a note. Okay, I see that there is a question here from Bill. And Bill asks, what are you using for heat mapping, and how did you use it if you don't have access to their site? Great question, Bill. So we're using an eye tracking tool set that we have access to and that we've put a lot of effort into here at The Good. Now that eye tracking tool set, because we don't need to, we're not tracking mouse movements on the site or anything, how people are engaging with the site. We're actually able to put the site in front of consumers and track their eye movements while they're looking at it, which does not require us to do anything on the source code of the brand's site. So we're able to, in that sense, be able to collect heat maps of where people are looking without actually having access to their site source code. Right. Are there any other questions? If you have any, now is the time to ask. Put them into the Ask a Question feature down at the bottom of the screen. Just click on that and it will pop up asking you. We'll give you a couple of minutes. We have about 2 minutes left. I do see, while anybody might be asking any last questions, I do see there was a comment that said, I think this was in relation to the credit cards in the footer that I mentioned. That I think they add them to let people know that there are cards that they accept. Yes, that is true. That is perhaps why they're there. But again, I would argue that consumers these days know and generally understand that you're accepting any type of credit card, that the major ones that they would want to use, right? There's really only, especially in the US, there's only 3 or 4 that consumers have anyways. They've all consolidated pretty closely there. Now there's other payment methods like Amazon Pay and PayPal and things of that sort. Look, if you're on any of the major e-commerce platforms, the reality is that you already have all of these payment methods built in and accept them. So it's just standard practice that you already have them all. So I wouldn't really struggle with including them, or actually not including them. Because they're just going to assume you accept their credit card, and it's not in context, it's not in the right place. If they really want to know that information, it would be during the process of checkout that they're wondering, or even in the cart once they've added something. A new question from Rachel says, is there a way to know if price is an issue that is keeping people from converting? That's a great question, Rachel. There is. There are several different ways to understand that. The first is surveying. You can do on-site surveying. You could also test running some discounting. Now, most of the time, brands know their pricing models pretty well, and if price is an issue. And typically what we find is the overall price becomes more of an issue than the price of the product. What I mean by that is by the time you add in shipping. And so a lot of brands, the challenge we see around this is in the cart, what they do is they make shipping a surprise until they get to the final step of checkout. And then all of a sudden shipping isn't free, which most people are used to these days, thank you, Amazon. Or what happens is that shipping ends up being so expensive that it adds to that cost, and the overall total cost is much more than they were expecting. Unfortunately, there's a thing called price anchoring as well. We often find this is the case where brands like to put their cheapest items or least expensive items first on their product detail pages and sort by price. The problem with that is that say you have a $12 item and then you have a $1,200 item, people expect when they see that $12 item, they're anchored to a lower price. And then when they start seeing the higher priced items, like, whoa, this is really, really expensive, even though the value may be there, they just don't recognize that value because of price anchoring. So there's a couple of different things you could test there. You could test the order in which you list your products. That would help you know if price is becoming an issue. I would look at price anchoring challenges. I would look at if overall price, in addition to or instead of just your product pricing, is the challenge. Okay. Unless there are any last second questions here, we're going to sign off for the day. I really thank you for attending today. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to email john@thegood.com. That's JON@thegood.com. Or hop in to sign up on thegood.com for our weekly insight emails, or schedule time to chat if you are interested in doing conversion optimization for your site. All right, well, that's all we have for today. Thank you so much again for attending, and have a wonderful rest of your day.